New studio, new studio. Okay. Hi, my douchies. Welcome back to the Alchemize Podcast. My name is Destiny, and I use the internet as my personal journal where I talk about wherever I want. And in today's journal entry, as you guys can see, we have a new setup. We are finally in our home studio. We finished it recently, and now we can chat in a more professional setting. You know, you and I, a little therapy session, where you are my therapist, by the way. We won't swap this out completely because I still love doing the outdoor type of setups, but this is a bit more calm, a little bit more chill. It'd be a nice way to switch it up now and again. So for today's topic, I would like to speak to you about what it's like having a very theoretical mind and how that affects you when you're trying to make your dreams come true. In my case, I've always been the type of kid that can get good grades by learning really hard the night before for a test or an exam or something like that, and then get a good grade, but then forget the next day what I was even supposed to be studying for. That has happened so many times in my life that I can't even count. Like, it's been the default for a very long time. And as they say, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I've noticed that in a lots of other areas of my life. I've been noticing that kind of rushed feel, that kind of theoretical and then forgetting it right after feel has been prevalent in my development. So, for example, I noticed that when I'm teaching myself a new way to deal with something, I can theoretically understand it, even explain it to others, even give others the same advice that I should be taking. But when it comes to putting it into practice, it's kind of hard for me to be consistent and to stick with it. I don't know if any of you have the same problem, but basically, I'm very good at giving advice and not always good at taking my own advice. Okay, I think a lot of people can relate to that, but it's a bit hindering sometimes, especially when I'm trying to create new habits and I'm trying to become a better person. It can stop me from being able to take the steps necessary to actually execute and elevate to the levels that I want to become. I've noticed that a lot of people are a lot more practical than I am. For example, my husband, when him and I have conversations about how to improve life or how to implement new skills, I notice that he goes straight into, okay, so then just do this. Maybe that's all men, but I have a really hard time just doing it. You know, I have to understand, and once I understand, I can see the pattern, and once I see the pattern, I can start thinking about a plan to start implementing it, and then I can finally do it. But he just says, okay, for example, I want to start being more fit, so that means I need to start working out. All right, I'm going to start working out. For me, the process looks more like thinking about how I'm going to trick my brain into allowing me to work out without feeling like it's a chore, and then trying to do it in a sort of trial and error type of way so that I can convince myself that this is the new habit that I'm going to form in my life. And I noticed that that process kind of drags everything further and further to the point where sometimes I don't even do the thing anymore, and it can be exhausting. I also noticed that I'm the type of person that's very attuned mentally and emotionally, but because I'm so attuned mentally and emotionally, it kind of makes it so that I'm always in my brain and in my mind and not really somatically processing things. So I can feel an emotion and I can understand why I'm feeling it. I can understand why certain habits that I've been adopting are not healthy for me, but it's very hard for me to put them aside and then process the feelings that I have. A very real and a bit of a vulnerable example is that I've struggled with being for the longest time. Trigger warning. I don't know, I think I'm supposed to give a trigger warning for these type of topics, but nonetheless, I've struggled with a bit of disordered eating, if you would like to call it that. And I notice that I've come to the point in my healing process where I've been able to identify the moment where the spiral starts. I see myself walking down a very familiar path, but I still can't stop myself from repeating the pattern. So because I've done the work, I understand why I disorderly eat. I understand what the first triggers can be. I understand and I can tell when it's happening, but to putting those lessons into practice and stopping myself or cutting off the loop as it's happening, it's very, very hard. I imagine it's hard for anyone, but I'm learning that, especially because I'm such a theoretical person and I've put a lot of emphasis on the learning of things instead of the practicing of things, it's extra hard for me. I'm trying to find a way to healthily navigate this because I know that eventually in life I'm going to have to surpass this era and move into a more healthier way of dealing with myself and having better coping mechanisms. I also have the same thing when it comes to scrolling. You know, I can tell when my mind starts going, okay, I'm a little bored, there's nothing to do. What else can I do except for doom scrolling? And then I just go into doing that. Or I'm having a negative emotion and I'm going into the mental space where I'm feeling very negatively about myself. And so to dissociate from that, I doom scroll or I disorderly eat or insert any other unhealthy coping mechanism that you could mention. You know, it's not only about me, but maybe you can apply it to your own life. Maybe you don't struggle with the same things I do, but maybe you have other not so healthy coping mechanisms that you can insert right there. And I think to start putting things into practice instead of just theorizing and understanding yourself so much and processing your emotions and your feelings somatically. First of all, it starts with letting go of the perfectionism that comes along with that, because I notice for me, for example, the reason why I mull over my decisions so much, or the reason why I want to think things through before I finally can work through them, is because I want to work through them perfectly. You know, when I start working, I want it to go as smoothly as possible. And sometimes it's hard to admit that you need to make it exist first imperfectly before you can improve it and make it better. And I know that for me, that's been a big part of my journey, to just allow things to be imperfect first and then to make them better. But one thing that I started doing that helped me realize that you can start imperfectly and then little by little make it better is walking. This example is very simple, but it is a big example of how if I stayed in the planning phase, I would not have figured it out. So last year, I think around maybe March, somewhere around there, I was looking at videos about how to get more fit without needing to go to a gym or something like that. Because I've been to the gym, but I can never be consistent. Well, let's not say never, but personally, I've never really been able to be consistent in the gym. Shoot me. I do like it though, and I love what it does for people. It just hasn't been working for me. But I thought to myself, if I can start walking, that can be a way that I can be consistent in something that's quite enjoyable, not too hard, and it yields results. But I remember being stuck in thinking, okay, well, I don't have a route to walk in the mornings, or oh, in the mornings it's too dark for me to go out and go for a walk, because I work quite early. So if I wanted to go on a walk, it would either have to be at the end of the day, which at the end of my work shift, I'm usually pretty tired, so that wasn't really working. Or it would have to be at the beginning of my day, which starts quite early. And if I start that early, it's gonna be dark. And I would say to myself, no, I can't go on a walk then because it'll be too dark. It'll be kind of scary on the road. Like, who knows who you're gonna find or encounter. And then one day, I was like, you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect. Let's just walk in circles on my porch. And I would wake up and start walking in circles on my porch. When my family members would wake up later, they would look out their window and be like, okay, what is she doing? She's just going back and forth on the porch. Looks crazy. But, you know, around September, of me doing that very consistently, because all I needed to do was just start, I noticed that there were changes. If I had waited and if I had been like, no, it needs to be perfect before I can actually do it back in March, in September, I still wouldn't have taken a step. But instead, I decided to walk in a very, let's say, unconventional way. Because if you think about walks, you think, okay, I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going for a walk. Or it's going to be later in the afternoon and I can go walk in my neighborhood. But that wasn't an option for me. I had the resources I had, which was an early morning and my feet. And all I can do is step outside and just start going. It was imperfect, but it was working. And whenever I think back at that example, that's what motivates me to allow myself to get back into things without needing it to be perfect, without theorizing too much about it. And back to the problem that I was explaining about it being hard for me to stop my negative loops. I think recently I discovered that the first step to healing, well, it's not something I realized recently, but something I've been putting into true practice recently, is that the true awareness of it is what snaps you out of it. Now, you can still decide to allow the loop to run its course, but because you're aware of it, now you've made it a choice. It's no longer something that's happening in your subconscious. It's becoming something that's happening because I've decided that I'm going to allow this loop to continue. And one of these days, well, it's already happened, but one of these days you could say, well, I've allowed this loop to go on and on for long enough. Today, I'm going to cut it short. Today, instead of losing control for 45 minutes, I'm gonna allow this for 30 minutes. Instead of doom scrolling and dissociating for an hour, I'm gonna do this for 30 minutes and then I'm gonna try to do something else. I think grace with ourselves is the key word here. We know that these coping mechanisms are ways that our bodies are trying to keep us safe. And so trying to quit them cold turkey can be quite hard, but allowing us the grace to be like, okay, we're tapering off instead of cutting out the one thing that's been making us feel safe for the longest time, it'll help. And so I think that's the message I wanted to bring out today. You know, it's been a little bit hard for me to come back to YouTube because it's been so long since I made a video. The year has started, you know. I remember last year when I started, it was like January, and I made a video where I spoke about how I want to reduce my screen time and about how I want to create more than I consume. And after a year of not making many videos, but just making a few, it's just been very exciting to just get back into it, and feeling the joy of creating again is so amazing. So I thank you guys so much for your support, and I thank you so much for enjoying this video with me, because I'm enjoying making it as much as you enjoy watching it. And I hope to make one again very, very soon. And I think that's it for today. Thank you again, my douchies, for listening, and I'll see you guys next time on the Alchemize Podcast. Bye, my douchies.